Listen, I am Mama Otomba, and I have carried the sound of dead cities in my bones longer than most of you have been alive, and tonight I will tell you about the woman who sang like Aretha Franklin before Aretha Franklin was even born into this world. A woman whose voice did not belong only to Harlem, but to something older than Harlem, something that walked in from the deserts of my ancestors, and learned to wear a silk dress and high heels under neon lights. It was 1956 when I first heard her sing in a place called the Blue Vulture, a nightclub buried between a pawn shop and a burnt-out church on Lenox Avenue, where jazz musicians played like they were trying to outrun their own shadows, and the air always smelled like whiskey sweat, and something faintly metallic like blood hiding behind perfume. Harlem was alive then, but it was also watching itself die in slow motion, and I could feel it every time the saxophone screamed too hard, or the drums slowed like a heart giving up. I was already old by then, older than I looked, carrying the kind of age that does not sit in the body, but in the spirit, and I had come from West Africa with knowledge that most people in New York would call superstition until they needed it. That night, the first time I saw her, she stood behind the curtain before she stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling as if something inside her was trying to escape. The club owner, a man with gold teeth and a smile like a broken promise, told me she was new, a girl from Georgia who could make men cry just by breathing into a microphone. But I knew better the moment I saw her eyes. There was a reflection inside them that did not match the room, a reflection of something vast and hungry, like a desert wind trapped behind glass. When she finally walked onto the stage, the band began to play without even speaking to each other, as if they had dreamed the notes in advance. The piano fell into a slow sorrow, the trumpet whispered like a warning, and then she opened her mouth. The first note she sang was not music, it was a call, a pull so deep that every glass in the club trembled slightly, and every man who had been laughing stopped as if someone had grabbed their spines. I felt it immediately in my chest, the presence behind her voice, something ancient and watching, and I whispered a prayer under my breath in my mother tongue. The woman sang like she was tearing open the sky and letting something pour through, something that did not belong in Harlem or anywhere near human ears. I saw one man at the bar begin to cry without knowing why, and another one started laughing like he had lost his mind, and the band, even they looked afraid now, but they could not stop playing because her voice was pulling them forward like a river pulling drowned bodies downstream. After the set, I went backstage to find her, though I already knew I should not. The hallway behind the stage was narrow and damp, lit by a single flickering bulb that made the walls breathe in and out like lungs. I found her sitting on a wooden crate, barefoot, her shoes beside her like discarded skins, and she was humming softly to herself, but it was not the song from the stage. It was something older, something that sounded like wind moving through bones. When she saw me, she did not seem surprised, only tired, as if she had been waiting for someone like me to arrive. She said her name was Evelyn, but I could tell that was only the name she used when she wanted to remain in this world. I asked her where the voice came from, and she smiled, like someone who has already paid a price and cannot get a refund. She told me she found it in the Mississippi mud when she was a child, a sound buried under the earth after a storm, a sound that called her by name even when no one else was around. But I knew that was only half the truth. That night I did something I had not done in many years. I took a small pouch from my waist, filled with ash, salt, and the teeth of an ancestor spirit I once bargained with in the desert, and I burned it slowly in my palm without flinching. The smoke rose between us and twisted into shapes that did not belong in this world, and I asked the spirits to show me what sat inside her voice. The air in the room changed immediately, growing colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer to listen. And then I saw it. Not with my eyes, but with the part of me that remembers before birth. Inside her voice was a presence that looked like a woman, but was not human, a spirit with no face, only a mouth made of sound, feeding on every note she sang. It was older than slavery, older than America, something that had crossed oceans inside forgotten songs, and attached itself to voices strong enough to carry it. Evelyn suddenly began to shake, clutching her throat as if she could feel what I saw, and she whispered that sometimes when she sang too long, she could not remember where she ended and something else began. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that something had just opened inside one of its brightest voices. And I knew then that Harlem would not survive her for long, unless someone taught her how to close what she had opened. But what I did not know yet was that the thing inside her voice had already seen me back. The next night I returned to the Blue Vulture even though every bone in my body told me not to. Because some warnings are not meant to stop you, but to prepare you for what is already waiting. And Harlem that evening felt different, as if the streetlights were burning lower on purpose, and the music drifting from open windows carried a sadness that did not belong to any living musician, only to something remembering how to pretend it was alive. Inside the club the air was thicker, almost sweet, like rotting fruit soaked in perfume, and the usual crowd of gamblers, dancers, and drunks was smaller, quieter, as though they had all agreed without speaking to listen more than they lived. Evelyn was already on stage when I entered, and she did not look at me, but I knew she felt me there because her shoulders tightened like a string pulled too hard. The band began again without introduction, but this time the music was slower, deeper, as if the instruments themselves were afraid to disturb what stood behind her voice. She sang, and immediately I understood that what I had seen in her the night before was no longer contained. It had spread like ink in water, touching everything it could reach. Every note she released seemed heavier, as though she was singing not songs but memories that did not belong to her, memories of fields where no cotton grew, of oceans that swallowed, names of drums that were beaten under foreign moons by hands that no longer had bodies. And in those sounds I heard something answering her from far away, something vast, moving closer. I closed my eyes and entered the space between sound and silence, the place my ancestors taught me to go when the world becomes too thin. And there I saw it clearly. The thing inside her voice was no longer just feeding on her, it was learning her, shaping itself through her throat, becoming more defined every time she exhaled a note. It was not a spirit in the way humans understand spirits. It was a collector of resonance, something that travels through sound, the way sickness travels through blood, and Evelyn was now its instrument. When she reached the highest note of her song, the lights in the club flickered violently, and for a brief moment I saw the ceiling of the Blue Vulture dissolve into a desert sky, filled with impossible stars. And I knew then that this thing had not come from America at all, but from somewhere older than maps, carried here through voices, stolen across generations. A man near the stage began to bleed from his nose without noticing, smiling as if he had just heard the most beautiful sound of his life. And another collapsed, laughing on the floor, his laughter turning into choking silence. I pushed through the crowd and stepped toward the stage, ignoring the club owner's shout, ignoring the way reality itself seemed to resist my movement, because I understood now that if she finished this song, the thing inside her would no longer need her at all. I reached the edge of the stage and looked up at her, and for the first time that night she saw me fully, and there was fear in her eyes, but also relief, like someone drowning who finally sees land even if it is far away. She stopped singing mid-note, and the silence that followed was worse than the music, heavy enough to bend the air. In that silence I spoke her real name, the one I had seen hidden under the false one, and I told her that what she carried was not a gift, but an inheritance stolen from a place where sound is alive and hungry. The band froze, the audience froze, even the dust in the air seemed to pause, and then the thing inside her reacted. Evelyn's body jerked backward as if something had grabbed her from the inside, and when she opened her mouth again, it was not her voice that came out, but something layered, multiple tones speaking at once like a choir of broken radios. It said my name without being taught, and in that moment I understood the worst truth. It had been listening since I first stepped into the club, not to Evelyn, but to me. The lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by a faint blue glow rising from Evelyn's chest like embers under skin, and in that glow I saw shapes, moving hands pressing outward from within her as if trying to learn how to become human. I reached into my pouch again, but before I could act, the voice spoke directly into my mind, not through sound but through recognition, as if it had been waiting for someone who knew how to answer it. It offered me a choice in a language older than words: leave her and live, or bind myself to what was inside her and become part of the listening. And I realized then that this was not just about Evelyn anymore, because the thing in her voice was not finished growing, and Harlem, with all its music and pain and beauty, was only the first place it had decided to learn how to sing. I am Mama Otomba, and when something old enough to predate language, offers you a choice, you must understand that both answers are already known to it, and the question is only meant to reveal who you are willing to become. And in that darkened club where Evelyn stood trembling with a second presence, breathing through her bones, I understood that refusing would not save her, only delay what would come for her again, in another voice, another body, another city. Because such things do not stop at resistance, they only learn patience. The blue vulture had fallen into a silence so complete that even the street outside seemed to hesitate, and I stepped closer to the stage until I could feel the heat radiating from Evelyn's chest like something alive trapped behind skin, and I spoke not to her but to what was inside her, calling upon the oldest names I still carry from the desert nights of my youth, names that were never meant for human tongues but for bargaining with forces that drink memory instead of blood. The thing answered immediately, not in words but in pressure, as if the air itself leaned forward to listen, and Evelyn's body lifted slightly off the ground as though gravity had forgotten her, her hair floating as if submerged underwater. I placed my palm over her forehead and began the binding, not as an exorcism as Western men would call it, but as a negotiation of containment, a sealing of resonance between spirit and vessel, and I felt it immediately resist me. Not with violence but with curiosity, like a predator realizing the hunter is not afraid. It showed me things in return, flooding my mind with fragments of places that did not belong to any map, vast deserts made of sound instead of sand. Oceans where voices sank instead of ships, civilizations that spoke only in music until they forgot what silence meant and were consumed by what they created. Evelyn screamed, but it was layered now. Her voice and the thing's voice tangled together like two radio stations bleeding into one frequency, and I understood I could not separate them without destroying her entirely, so I did the only thing left to do. I offered myself as an anchor. I opened the seal inside my pouch, fully releasing ash salt and ancestral teeth into the air, and I called every spirit that had ever answered my bloodline, every watcher, every listener, every forgotten protector, and I felt them arrive like a storm of unseen hands pressing against reality. The club around us began to fracture at the edges, walls flickering between Harlem and somewhere else, as if two worlds were trying to occupy the same space and failing to decide which one had authority. The thing inside Evelyn reacted violently now, recognizing containment, and for the first time it showed fear, not of me, but of being unheard, of being silenced again after eons of drifting through voices without permanence. It tried to escape through sound, exploding into a wave of noise that shattered every glass in the building, and dropped several men to their knees, clutching their ears, but I held the binding steady, grounding it through rhythm, through heartbeat, through the inherited cadence of my ancestors' drums that still live inside me even when no instrument is present. And then something unexpected happened, something neither I nor the thing had fully prepared for. Evelyn sang. Not the possessed song, not the thing speaking through her, but her own voice, small and fragile and human, threading itself through the chaos like a single candle in a collapsing temple. And in that moment, the binding found its shape. The two voices collided, not in conflict but in alignment, and I sealed them together, not to imprison the thing alone, but to force coexistence, to make the parasite and the host share breath without domination. The light inside her chest dimmed, not extinguished but contained like embers covered with ash to prevent spread, and her body fell gently back onto the stage as the air returned to something resembling normal. The blue vulture did not recover that night, though, because places that witnessed too much truth rarely remain stable afterward, and when the first sirens began to echo outside, I knew we had only moments before the world returned and demanded explanation for what it could not categorize. I leaned down and whispered to Evelyn that she would live, but never sing the same way again, and she cried quietly, not from pain, but from the absence of something she could no longer fully name. As I stepped away from her, I felt the thing inside her settle, no longer expanding but waiting, listening through her silence like a prisoner who has learned patience instead of rage. Outside, Harlem continued as if nothing had happened. Jazz bleeding from other clubs, laughter spilling onto sidewalks, life refusing to acknowledge the fracture it had just survived. But I knew better, because I could still hear it faintly beneath everything. A new frequency woven into the city itself, as if one voice had changed the architecture of sound forever. And I, Mama Otomba, walked away from the blue vulture knowing that I had not defeated anything that night, only taught it restraint. and that sometimes restraint is the most dangerous evolution of all, because what learns to wait also learns to return, and when it does, it will not come alone, it will come in harmony.